Okay, so now it's time to start working on the backend. In this task I'm going to set up Docker for Django and use PostgresQL, and I'm going to install Django REST framework, course headers, pillow, and a few other things that we're going to need. But first of all, what is Docker and Docker Compose? Docker is a platform designed to help developers build, share, and run container applications. They handle the tedious setup so we can focus on the code. And Docker Compose is a tool that we can use to define and share multi-container applications, meaning that we can have one container with PostgreSQL that multiple Django applications can use. Okay, so I'm just going to jump right into this. And in this part, I'm also going to try to use this diagram here and draw a little bit to explain a little bit more how Docker, Django, and similar are connected. But we can begin by setting up Docker. The website for Docker is docker.com. It's free to use personally and similar like that, so you can head there, install it, and make sure that you have it running. When Docker desktop is running, we are ready to start. Okay, so now I have Docker desktop running here and we are ready to start. So I'm going to head to the command line and split the screen here. If you don't have the split option, you can just use two windows. And then I'm going to go into Documents, Projects, and Django BNB. Then you can see here that I have the Demo Images folder and the Django BNB folder. The Django BNB folder is the front end, so I want to create a folder called backend. So mkdir backend. Then I can go into this, and this will then be the root folder for the whole backend project with the Docker file and similar. And then in here I can create one more folder, mkdir Django BNB backend, and go into this, and this will then be the Django project. In here I want to create a virtual environment where we're going to install Django, and we need Django just to create a project actually. If you already have Django installed on your computer, you can use this. So let's just run python 3-m venv, which is virtual environment, and then env, which will be the name of the virtual environment. So now that I have this one, I can activate it by saying source env bin activate. And now that this is activated, it means that when I use the pip command to install Django, it will only be installed into this environment and nothing else. So pip install Django. Yes, pip install Django. Hopefully it will install 5.02, which is the current newest version of Django. So that's installed, and a few other dependencies that Django has. And now that Django is installed, we can create an empty project by saying django-admin start project, and then the name, which is Django BNB underscore backend, and dot, because I want to install it in the folder that I am. So hit enter. That means that now I have the environment, the manage.py, and the sub-project folder, which contains the settings and similar. If I open this in Visual Studio Code, it might look a little bit easier to understand. So open folder, then I can add the backend. So in the backend, I have the Django project with the typical manage.py, and then there we have the settings, and then we have the environment here. Nice. So next step then is to create a requirements.txt file, and this should contain all of the Python packages that we want for this project. Right now it's only Django. Let's find out which version was installed by saying pip freeze, and you can see it's 5.02. If you have a slightly newer or older version, that will probably work. And then inside this Django BNB folder, the top one, we create one more file called requirements.txt. Then I just paste Django == 502. And this means that we're going to, when we install this on, for example, a server and similar, we will only get this version of Django, which means that it will be the same Django version on all platforms. Great. So now we have created a new project. Django is installed and similar. So then we can create the Docker file. So in the same folder as we have these two files, we create a file called Docker file with no extensions. Remember the capital D. First, I want to pull an official image for Python. So from Python colon 3.12. Let me check what's the newest version of Python. Python 3 Slim Buster. Official image Python 3. Let me just see what version we should use. Python Slim Buster. I think we're on 3.12 or similar. Okay, you can see the versions or tags that we have here. So it's 3.13 and we can use the Slim. Not sure what the difference between all of these are, but let's just use Slim. So that means that I now can copy this, go back to here and just paste it in like this. So now we will get the Slim version of 3.13, which is sort of the base for the whole Docker file. And then we need to set the work directory inside this Docker container. Work there /usr/src/Django BNB _backend. So now this will be the path inside Unix system. And then on the next line we want to set an env variable, env python don't write bytecode 1, and this prevents Python from creating the PYC files. You know, the PYC that always is in many projects. We don't want them in here. And then we want one more, env python unbuffered1, and this prevents Python from buffering std_out and std_er. And what this is that when Python buffers output, it collects certain amount of data before it writes it to the terminal or to a file. And this buffering behavior can cause delays in seeing output, especially when running Python scripts in certain environment like Docker. That's why we want to set this to 1, because we don't want to buffer. And then we want to make sure that pip has the newest version of itself. So we run pip install --upgrade pip, so not just upgrade itself. And then we say copy ./requirements.txt dot. So what this does is that it copies this file, which is in the same folder that we are now, and into this folder here. And when that is done, we say run pip lowercase pip install -r requirements.txt. So this command will then install everything that we have in this file. And when all of that is ready, we can just say copy ... So this will copy the entire Django project into this folder, the work directory. Okay, so we can save this for now. We will soon come back and actually use this. But before we use it, we want to create a Docker compose file. This should not be in this folder, but in the root backend folder here. So just call this docker compose.yml. YML is YAML, which is a sort of scripting language with very ugly syntax, but it works for this purpose. So what we want to write here is version : 3.8, and this tells Docker that the version of YAML that we're going to use, or version of Docker maybe, is 3.8. And then we want to create sort of a container or a service inside this composer here. So to do that we say services, and we want to create a service called web. This will be the Django project. These services need certain commands or properties to build and run and similar. So let's begin with one called build, and this should just say ./Django BNB backend. And this folder here is the folder here. So you don't have to think about this, or sorry, the folder that we copy into this, which is the Django project. And the command we want to run, command is python manage.py run server 0000:8000. So this command will start the development server on this port on the local IP address for the Docker container, so we can now access it from the outside, soon at least. And then we want to set up something called volumes property dash and then ./Django BNB backend /:usr/src/Django BNB backend /. And what this does is that it helps us persist data and tells us that the things in here should persist inside this path here. And then we need to tell the service what ports should be used, and that is 8000:8000. So this is then the port in to Docker, and this is the port that should match the one you have here. And then the last property is the env file. This should be ./.env_dev. So this environmental file here should in this project contain, for example, the password for the database, if you are debugging, the secret key and similar. And since we use env.dev, it's easier to understand that the variables we put in there is specifically just for development. So if I save now, open up the browser, then inside the same folder as this one, in the backend folder, we create a new file called .env.dev. So we can set 3 environmental variables here. Debug equals 1 and secret key equals, and this doesn't really matter what you call here in development, so I can just call mine code with Stein. You can call it foobar or whatever you want, because it doesn't have to be secret since it's just local development. And then we set up something called Django allowed hosts equals localhost 127.0.0.1 and 1. So these are now addresses, IP address and similar, that are allowed to use this server or Django project. Soon we will put this into settings.py. I hope I don't go too fast forward here. I will soon draw in the Eraser app just to show how things are connected. The last thing before we do anything more here is to just open up settings.py and remove this comment and import OS, because now we want to read variables from this file. So instead of putting out this secret key here, as you can see here, it says insecure because it's not secure right now. We want to read the variable that we have here, which should be a secret key on production. And then here we can just say os.environ.get secret key. This name needs to match this name. Then we have the debug variable. This is a little bit different since this is a boolean, so we need to tell Python to convert this to a boolean, true or false. os.environ.get debug, and the default value for this should be 0. So by default this is false, which means that we are in production, which means that error messages and similar will not show in the browser, but since we are on dev, we set this to 1, which is a true value, and that means that we are in debug mode. And then we have this one, os.environ.get Django allowed hosts .split space. So what this does is that it takes this string here, split it by this space, and creates sort of a array that looks like this: localhost 127, etc. So it generally just creates this list there and save. So now the setup there should be ready, and we should be able to start building this container, and hopefully everything should run and we can test. I just want to go in here and draw a little bit here. So first of all, we have a computer like this. This is our computer. Let me write up here, computer. Doesn't matter if you have Windows or Mac or whatever, everyone has a computer. And then in here we have a Docker container, a Docker container. You can add a label to this, Docker container. And this Docker container can include services like Django. It can include services like Postgresql, and there are actually sort of no limits to what this can do. You can install a full version of Ubuntu, you can install Nginx, GUnicorn, etc. And some of these we actually are going to install later in this tutorial. When you install these in this container, the computer doesn't actually know anything about what's happening in here. It only can read what you put in the port 8000, which is sort of a server running on your computer. On your computer you have this .env.dev file with the environmental variables. These variables can be read by Django container, and since this Docker container reads from this env file, Docker, PostgreSQL and similar can then read from this Docker container. So as you saw here, we read this file from here, and then this settings.py doesn't read this file, but it reads the contents of what you have here, which is put into this service. So I might not be the best to explain everything here, but hopefully it makes a little bit sense. So right now we have this Django, which is this service here, and soon when we set up PostgreSQL, we will set up that below here. So we could actually say services like that. So this Docker container contains a lot of services. If we set up one more Docker container, that Docker container can talk to this PostgreSQL if you wanted to do that. So you don't have to install and create a new PostgreSQL server for each Django project that you have on your computer. Okay, I will come back more to this later when we install more things here and when we start using the API and similar. Okay, anyways, we have set up everything here, so let's go to the terminal, just deactivate the environment, deactivate, clear. And then to build this Docker composer, we just a docker-compose build. And then this will download and install everything you need. Whoops. Load meta, failed to solve. Okay, maybe I couldn't use the one that I copied from here. But why not? Okay, so it's up and running again. Let's try to just run the command again. Yes, so now you will see that this will download Python 3.13 and probably a few other dependencies that that Python has to run. No. Okay, my internet clicked again. Okay, 3 times is a charm, hopefully. Yes, now the downloading seems to be working. So now this will download everything we need to run. And then you can see here, these other commands started to run, work there. These are coming from the Docker file with you can see here, work there, setup there, and now it's upgrading pip. It's installing things from the requirements file, writing image, naming the Docker backend web, blah blah blah, Docker scan. Okay, looks like everything worked. So let's open up here again, images. Now we have an image there, and inside containers is nothing yet because we just built the image. This image is actually shareable, so I could share it with you. I think that's how it works. But let's try to run the container and see if we can access the Django website. So docker compose up. Sorry, docker compose up -d. -d makes it run in the background, by the way. So looks like that's okay. Let's open up the container. Status exited. That's not good. But let's try without the -d to see if there are any errors. Can't open file. No such file or directory. Okay. Now, okay, let's go up one folder. I have to be in the Docker compose, I think. Let's try running Docker compose up again. No, it still doesn't work. So I think there is something wrong with this path and everything there. So I just have to look over what I have done wrong. Okay, so the problem was I had a space here. It was not supposed to be there. When I saved this, then run the command docker compose up again, you can see that everything started, and you can reach the development server at 0008000, but for us it will be localhost :8000. And there you have it. The install worked successfully. Congratulations. Perfect. Which means that now the backend is not set up finished, but we have Django running at least. Perfect. Let's set up PostgreSQL. So let's go back to Visual Studio Code, and then inside services here we can create a new service called DB for database. Image. This image should just be called Postgres:15. So it's PostgreSQL version 15. We want to set up a volumes for this as well. Remember this space. Postgres data :var lib /postgresql /data, and then this is where the data will persist inside the environment, so that you don't have to recreate databases and similar every time you start this. Then we need to set up a few environmental variables. So environment. The name is Postgres user, and the name for this user can just be Postgres user. Then we need to set up Postgres password equals Postgres password. Again, this doesn't need to be secure because we are just in development. It's a little bit more important when we're going live. And Postgres DB, which is the name of the database, it can just be Django BNB. Or you can call it whatever you want if you want to change it. Then you need to set up one more thing here, so it's outside the services. This is called volumes and this will then inside the Docker desktop register it in here, so it will actually be loaded from here every time we start this container. And then we just pass in Postgres data : so it looks a little bit weird, but it actually is correct. Right now these do not speak to each other, but they can speak to each other. So let me just rename this to DB, so we know which one this is inside there, web. Right now these don't know that they exist, but we want to have a link between these. And this link can be created by adding one more property to the web service called depends on, and what this depends on is DB, which is this name down there. So we can save this now. That's what we need to do in the Docker compose. Then we need to add a few more variables in the environmental file. So first of all, we can set SQL _engine equals django.db.backends.postgresql. So instead of using whatever is there right now we have the Django DB backends SQLite 3, but we need to specify that we're using PostgreSQL. We need to specify which database we are going to use. Database equals, this should come from here, Django BNB. Then we need to specify the user, SQL user. This user needs to be this user. SQL host, password first. Password, this needs to be this one. And then SQL host, which should be DB. This DB is this one or this one, which should be the same. And then SQL host, port equals 5432, which is the default port for PostgreSQL. So we need to specify both here and here. So the services up here reads it from here, and this DB reads it from here. So they still need to be the same for now. Then we just need to configure settings to use the variables from here. So instead of saying engine like this, we can say os.environ.get SQL engine, which is not there, this one here, variable. Then we need to specify the name of the database, os.environ.get SQL name, SQL database. Can just copy and paste a little bit now. We need to specify the user, the SQL user. We need to specify the password, SQL password. We need to specify the host, SQL host, and the port, SQL port. So these 6 variables here, these 6 names you see here, should match these 6 here. So then we can save this. We also need to do one more change to the requirements.txt, because for Django to work with PostgreSQL, we need to install something called psychopg2-binary. And this is a Python package for speaking with this type of database. The version we want to use is 2.9.9, which is currently the newest version of this. So what's good about specifying the versions here is that if you do that, you will be sure that you're using the same version of the software that I am using. So let's try to rebuild this image and use it. So just stop it like this, and then we say docker dash compose up dash dash build. So now this will rebuild it and start it. So now this will pull PostgreSQL 15 and install it. I don't think it will do anything with Python now because we already had it. At least it was cached, so you don't have to download it more than once. So this download seems to take a little bit time. Okay, I need to just stop. If this happens to you too, you can try to stop the Docker desktop and restart things. So I'm going to do that. Now you need to start it again. It seems, hopefully that will work. So now it's starting again. Okay, let me try to run the docker compose up dash dash build again. So now it's downloading PostgreSQL 15. So now it looks like it's going forward. Yes, perfect. So now it's building and it's going through this here again with the work there, upgrading pip. Okay, so service web failed to build. Let me just see if this version is the correct one. Psycho PG2 binary 299. Okay, I might actually have used a too new version of Python. Okay. Let's go back here again. Find Python 12. Sorry about that. Overview. Okay, so copy this name instead. So 312.2 slim bullseye. Go back to the Docker file and paste that there. Save. Now we can try to rebuild everything again. So now you can see here that it's using an little bit older version of Python. So now it's installing Psycho PG2 and Django. So now it's copying the project, exporting, and it should be running now. It's starting the database. Good. So let's try going to localhost 8000 again. Okay, so we have Django running now, and hopefully also PostgreSQL. Let's stop this again by hitting Ctrl+C. And what I want to do now is to run the migrate command, because you can see here that I have this warning, you have 18 unapplied migrations. And to run this command inside the container, we can use docker-compose exec for execute web, which is the name that we have there, which is this service, python manage.py migrate. Let's run it. Okay, that's good. We don't want to rebuild this now, so we can just run docker compose up, and now we don't have this warning. Yes, we still have the warning. Why didn't this work? Okay, but it doesn't really matter right now. We can fix it soon. What I want to do now is to create a new file called an entry point. And this entry point should actually run this migration for us and also make sure that Postgres is running. So if you just go here now, we can see on the image that both of these are in use, and then the container exited because I stopped it. But if I run this here command, starting in the background, you can see that both of them are running. Great. So let's go back to Visual Studio Code and work on this entry file. So inside where we have manage.py and the requirements, which is this folder here, we create a new file called entrypoint.sh, which is a shell script. And the first thing we need to do then is hash !bin/sh, just to again tell the system that this is a shell script. And then we can write the if statement there to check if the database name is the correct one. So if $database equals just one equal Postgres, then we go into this loop here and say echo check if database is running. And to check this, we are just going to use something called netcat, which is something we are going to install into Docker to test that this is up and running. Then you can say while exclamation mark nc, which is netcat -z, and then we pass in the SQL host and the SQL port. Remember this semicolon do. And while this netcat can't connect to this, we go into this while loop here, say sleep 0.1. So don't just make the system sleep for 10 milliseconds before we use netcat again to test if this is up and running. Done. So when this is done, we just continue, and now we can say echo the database is up and running. Smiley face. And to close the if loop, we say fi, which is just if backwards. And then when we know that the database is running, we can run a Python command, python manage.py migrate, and then we say execute $@ and then the tick again. And in the shell script, this here is a special parameter that represents all the positional parameters passed to the script or a function. So for example, if we run entry point .h space hello, then one of those arguments could be put in here if there are any. So we can save this. So now we want to change the Docker file again to actually use this entry point. And to use this entry point, you need to install and use nc or netcat. So below here we can say run apt-get update, just to update everything on the server, and then apt-get install-y netcat. So you can see here netcat is just nc. And then we run the pip and install everything there. And then after everything is installed, we want to copy the entry point file into this as well. So copy./entrypoint.sh. So need capital letters. Okay, dot, because that's this work directory. And when that is done, we say run sed-i tick s /r $/g. So what this does now is that it here is something wrong. sed-i s /r $/g, and then we write the content from this into usr/src /Django BNB backend /entrypoint.sh. And then we also need to make this file executable, so run chmod for change modification +x, this will make it executable, /usr src Django backend /entrypoint.sh. So now this can be a run. And then when everything is copied over, we can set the entry point here, and then we just pass in /usr src Django backend BNB entrypoint.sh. So now this Docker file will actually run this. Last thing you need to do before we test this is to set an environmental variable at the bottom here. We set database equals Postgres. And this name here is what we are reading there. And this should match this one. So let's try to rebuild this again. So docker compose up -- build. So this shouldn't take too long now. Everything we need now is to install netcat, as you can see there. So now it's upgrading pip, installing the requirements, Django, psychopg2, yada yada yada. There you can see it made it. Oops, there's something wrong. Failed to create, unable to start container, permission denied. I might actually need to make it executable here first. So let me just try to run chmod +x /Django BNB backend entry point .sh. I think that should be it. I think I wrote it correctly here. chmod +x. Yes, try to rebuild again. Okay, that looks a little bit better at least. Blah blah blah. So ready for startup, stopped startup. Exited with code 2. So there's something wrong with the backend web. Syntax error fi unexpected. Okay, I probably forgot something in the entry point. I think that in this if statement here, I should actually on the next line say or then, like that. So in this shell script, I think it should be ready now. Let's stop, start or build again. Unexpected then. Let's go to the script again. I just need to look over everything here. Maybe this actually should be on a separate line. Let's try that by stopping and building again. Yes, there, that looks better. So if I scroll up now, you could see some of the commands. Check if database is running. The database is up and running. And you can see here it's running the migrate. Perfect. Okay, so then we need to do, or we can actually go back to the to-do list because we can set this to done. So now we just need to install Django REST framework, course header, etc. So if I go back to Visual Studio Code and I find the requirements.txt, then below here we can install dj.rest-auth equals 400, and we want to install Django-all-auth equals 052.0. We want to install Django course headers 4.3.1. I will come back to these later in this tutorial and explain more what each of them do. The Django REST framework version 3.14.0 and the Django REST framework - simple JWT 5.3-1 and Pillow. Pillow is a Python package you need to use images in Django 10.2.0. So I think that is everything for now, and we can install channels. So channels equals 400. This is something we need for the real time, and Daphne 400. So I think that's it. So if I just stop now, rebuild it again, then hopefully we should have everything that we need so we can continue building this awesome project. Great. Now you can see that there were no migrations to run and the development server is running. And if I go here, refresh, everything is as it was. So I just want to stop this now and I want to run this in the background like that. So it's still running here, as you can see now. Perfect. So then I can go to the to-do list here in Eraser. Oops, I closed it. And set this to done. Okay, so now that everything is installed, the Docker container is running, we have PostgreSQL database and similar, we can start working on the user model. So to do this, we need to create a new Django app. So I can't talk, or I can't use the Python here to create a new app. Maybe I can use Docker compose exec web python manage.py start app and then use user account. So now you can see here we have the user account, which is a Django app where we're going to specify the Django model and similar for the user accounts. Before I start defining the model, so as you can see here, I have it now inside this Django project. Let's open up models.py and start working on this. So I want to import a few things first. So first we can say import UUID because I want to use this for having different types of IDs for the users. And then I want to make it possible to use things from the settings file. So from django.conf import settings. So now I can access variables from the settings file. And I want to import a few things from the built-in user models. So from Django, .contrib.auth.models import abstract base user. And I want to import permission mixin and user manager. A user manager is, for example, when I can show down here, if you say user equals user.object.get pk equals 1, this object here is a manager, and we're going to create our own, or at least override the built-in to change a few things. I can make this a little bit wider so they can see everything I've imported so far, and then I want to start building it down here. So I can say class custom user manager. We can begin with this one, then we just pass in user manager. So now we sort of inherit everything that this has already, but we want to override a few of the functions or methods as it's called here. So def underscore create user, this is one we want to override. Self, name, email, password, and if there are any extra fields. What I want to do here is to check that, first of all, if there are an email, then we can say if not email, then we can raise an error by saying raise value error. You have not specified a valid email address. So now this will show in the backend first of all. And then we can say email equals self.normalize email. Pass in email. This function here, normalize email, already exists in user manager. So we just reuse it to make sure that this email is valid and that there are no funky things in it. Then we can say user equals self.model. Email equals email. So now we actually create a user. Name equals name. And extra fields. We can't pass in the password here because we need to use a function for this by using user.setPassword and pass in password. And since we use this here, it will be salted or hashed or whatever you call it. Now we can save this, user.save, using equals self.db. Return user. So this is almost what the default one looks like, but since we want to use name and email and password instead of the first name, last name and username, etc., we need to override this. And then we create the actual function that should be able to be used from the command line and similar. So def create user, self name equals none, so it should just default to none, email none, password none, and then the extra fields. And in here we can say extra fields dot set default is staff to false. So when we just default set all users that is created to not be staff, and let's copy this and that is super user to false as well, because most users we create should not be a super user. And return self._create users. And now we use this method up here, pass in name, email, password, and pass in the extra fields if there are any. And then we want one more called create super user. So def create super user. Oops. And this command here or function is the one we typically use when we say Python managed by create super user. So we want to create our own here. Create super user and self name equals. I can actually just copy this one, copy up to there, because they are very similar. This should just have these two values default to true, because when we create a super user, these should of course be true, so you can access the admin area and similar. So that's the user manager. Hopefully it should make sense. If you have any questions about this, feel free to leave a comment below and I will answer as soon as I can. So then we create the actual user database model. This is not something that will be created in the database or anything. It's just something that Django knows about. So here we want to pass in the abstract base user and the permissions mix in. So then we reuse much of the built-in things. First we can use the ID field. ID equals models.uuid field. This should be a primary key, so primary key equals true. And the default value for this should be uuid.uuid64. So it now uses the thing we imported up there. And editable equals false. And when you set something to editable, it will not show up in the admin interface and similar, because this is not something you want to change. This is automatically generated. I have the email field, which is a models.email field, and unique equals true, because we don't want to have two users with the same email address. So now Django will automatically validate this for us. Name is a char field. You can set the max length to 255, because we don't need to have any restrictions there. Blank equals true and null equals true, in case a user don't want to fill this out. There are many weirdos out there. Avatar equals models.image field. So now we want to use a different different field type called image, which takes a parameter called upload to, and we want to upload to a folder called uploads/avatars, like that. In settings we're going to define where this is on the server before we start creating these models and similar, but we don't have to think about that right now. Is active equals models.boolean field. So this will, if this is set to false, then the user will not be able to log in. default equals true. Actually, is active should be set default to false, so that no, we set this to true, sorry. Set it to true. But if you want email validation and similar, you need to set this default to false. Is superuser equals model.boolean field. Default this to false. Copy and paste is staff. Default to false as well. Then we want to know when this user joined the project or created the account, or date joined equals model.date time field. Auto now add equals true. Auto now add means that when this is added to the database, this entry now will be added to this field automatically. So we don't have to think more about that. Last login equals models.date date time field, and this can be blank equals true, null equals true, because we don't know when the user when you just create an account, you are maybe not logged in, so it could be empty, but every time we log in, this should be updated. Then we say objects equals custom user manager. So this objects here is the typical user.objects. We could call this custom object if you want to do that and keep using the objects that comes default, but that usually becomes a little bit of a hassle. So let's just call this objects. And then we want to specify which of these fields is the field we are going to use for logging in. So username field equals email, this one. And which field is the email field? Email field equals email. And the reason we have to specify this is because it's something that the abstract base user uses, so we just need to have it here as well. And required fields, required fields equals, this should be a list name. So these are sort of already mandatory, but we set this required as well, and that will make sure that when we create a user, for example using the create user command, this will be prompted to the user. And yes, that should be it for now. I think we can save this and update the database. So docker-compose exec web python manage by make migrations. No changes detected, of course not. We need to tell Django that we're going to use this app. So inside installed apps, let's add user account here. But what we also need to do now is to make sure that we are using this model as the default auth model. So we need to set one more thing here. Auth user model equals user account dot user. So this here points to the app and this points to this model here. I think there is a little problem here now, because we should already have a user model that, since we have already run the command python migrate, module UUID has no attribute UUID 64. Maybe I did a typo. Yes, I definitely did. It's supposed to be UUID 4. Let's just run this and see what it says. Create model user. Okay, but we want to remove everything that was there before. So I think we can say flush db. Maybe just flush. And yes, you can see here, this is irreversible. So this will destroy everything in the database and return each table to an empty state. Are you sure you want to do this? Yes. The database couldn't be flushed. Possible reason: the database isn't running. Blah 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 blah. Okay. That's not good. Okay, look at the output. Just going to run this command and see what happens. Settings module, blah, 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 properly configured. Yes, it's probably because I'm not inside the environment, so I need to delete the database. Okay, let me just... actually not sure how to flush this, since this is not working. Okay, I will just have to stop this container, and I want to delete these volumes that are connected to the database. Image. Okay, try to delete this one. Is in use, blah blah blah. Okay, stop everything. Let me just delete everything. Okay, remove, and remove this volume. Okay, so now everything is blank again. Sorry about all of this mess. So let's just rebuild the container. Docker compose up -- rebuild. Of course not. Just build. So now this will install everything again. Download if it's not there. Yes, since I deleted the image, I had to download everything again. But as you can see, this didn't take too long now. It's creating the new database table, and you can see here it's actually using the user account migrations. So now it is running localhost 8000. Yes, it's working. Perfect. Okay, so I can stop and I can run this in the background again. Docker compose up -d. Perfect. Okay, so now we have the database table and everything looks okay. So that means that now I can stop this and we can create a new app for the properties. So just like we created that other app, the user account app, we can use this command again, property. So docker compose exec web python manager.py start app property. Great. And then we go back to the code, and then we can tell Django backend that we have a new app called property. But before I do anything else here, let me save this for now. Actually, I want to go back to the to-do list and create a new app, a new to-do called configure drf course, etc. Because you need to do a few things to the settings file. So we can just do that before we do anything more fun. So inside here, we need to set up a lot of different things. We need to specify something called a site ID. Set this to 1. This has to do with the all auth and make it possible to log in. We have set up this so that can just be like it is. I want to set up something called a website URL http:// localhost 8000. This is just URL for the server in case we need it. We can set up the simple JWT, create a dictionary, one variable access, token lifetime, and the value for this should be time delta parenthesis minutes equals 60. So the lifetime for access token is 60 minutes. So after 60 minutes, this needs to be reactivated. As you can see here, I get error now because we haven't imported time delta. From date time import time delta. So the error is gone. Then we need to specify something called a refresh token. Refresh token lifetime. How long should this live? Time delta days equals 7. So you can stay logged in for a total of 7 days. And you use the refresh token multiple times to get a new access token. And then rotate refresh token. This can be default set to false, because it doesn't really matter that we don't have to refresh them. I have in a database that different tokens can't be used again. Blacklist after rotation. This can also just be set to false, since we don't have this here set to true. This doesn't really matter. And update last login true. So this will then update this field here automatically. And signing key. Okay, maybe this is also something we should get from the environmental file. Let's come back to that. Right now it can just be a complex key. So we remember to come back to this. Algorithm. That's wrong. Algorithm. Yes, that's right. Age S512. So which algorithm to use for these tokens, comma. So that was the configuration for that one. Then we need some more configuration. Account user model username field. So which field are we going to use? Let's just say none. That's just the way it is for this one. Account email required equals true. And account username required equals true. Sorry, zero be false because we don't require the user to have a username. The user should just have an email address. Account authentication method is email, and account email verification equals none, because we are not going to require email that you have verified it. Okay, so this is then for the authentication to work, how it's going to work and similar. Then we need to specify the REST framework equals, create a new dictionary, and then we set up something called the default authentication classes, and the default authentication class to use here is REST underscore framework underscore simple JWT dot authentication dot JWT authentication comma. Actually, this should be a tuple and not a subdictionary, like that. And we also need to specify the default permission class. So default permission classes, again use parentheses because this is a tuple, REST underscore framework dot permissions dot is authenticated. And what this does is that this is what we want to authenticate users with, the JSON web token, And the permissions that we want to use is that the user should always be authenticated to access the data. Then we need to configure course allowed origins. So course underscore allowed origins equals create a list http://127.0.0.1.8,000. This will be the backend, but let's also set up for the front end, which is 3000. And this just make sure that a request into the API has to come from one of these addresses. If not, they will be rejected. That makes it much easier to prevent people misusing your API and similar. And then REST auth equals, so then we need to configure this to use underscore JWT true, because we want to use this, and JWT auth HTTP only to true. No, sorry, false. Okay, so then we have configured the REST authentication as well. And then we can set course allowed origins. This is not anything I need. Okay, let's just keep it like this for now. Then inside install apps, we have these that we have already, but we need a few new things. So we need to add a REST framework. We need to, this REST underscore framework, REST underscore framework dot auth token, REST framework dot underscore simple JWT. So there's the dot, there's underscore, just by the way. We want to use all auth. We want to use all auth dot account, which is then the user model that this will use. DJ underscore REST auth, DJ underscore REST auth dot registration, and last but not least the course headers. So this is for the REST framework so that we can use API. These are for authentication between Django, the REST framework and similar, and how to use the tokens. This is for allowing things to come from the front end. So that's it there. Then we just need to add one more thing here above this common. So on the third line here we can say course headers dot middleware dot course middleware. Okay, then I think all configuration is ready. Let's run this command, just see. There are no issues right now, at least. You can see here now I have 5 unapplied migrations, and that is because when we added this, they come with some migrations file. So we need to run the migrate script again. So we can just run docker compose exec web python manage.py migrate. That did not seem to work. Do I need to build it again in order to run that command? Let's run this docker command up build just to make sure. We haven't added any data yet, so it shouldn't ruin anything at least. So there we got the new migrations, the account and the auth token, and the project is now running and there are no warnings. Great. If I refresh, the project is still working. Nice. So that means that now I can configure or set this task to done, because now we have configured everything in the backend. Yes, so let's continue with the app for the properties. Great, this is the model for the user. Okay, so everything there is now set up But we need to do one more thing here in the settings file, and that is to set up the media files. So we have the static files, but we also need the media root equals media slash and the media, sorry, that was supposed to be media URL and then the media root. So where on the server should we put the files? I want to have this in the base there, slash media, save. So this here will now point to this Django folder here, and media will be created the first time we upload a photo. And then here we have the avatar for the user. Upload avatar will be put inside the media folder there. Okay, so then I can set this task to done. So now we can continue setting up the app for the properties. So let's go back to Visual Studio Code. Okay, so Django is running there. We have the model for the user, so let's set up the model for a property. So we can begin by importing UUID here as well. So import UUID. I want to use some settings here. So import from django.conf import settings. This should be like it is. And then I want to import the user model. So from user account.models import user. And then we can set up a class property, pass in models.model, and we can copy the ID field from here since it's a little bit long and we don't have to write it again. It's still just the same. Then I want the title field, which is the name or whatever you want to call it for the property, equals models.char field, max length can be 255. We don't want this to be blank, so it can be like this. I want the description field, which should be a model.text field, and I think that this should also be required, so just keep the parentheses there empty. We can set the price per night equals models.integer field. This should also be required. Integer field is easy for whole dollars. You usually don't have $99.99 and similar. If you want to do that, you need to have a float field instead. Bedrooms equals models.integer field. So we need to keep track of how many bedrooms you can allow. Bathrooms, maybe number of guests. Here you can add more fields if you want to do that. I want to keep track of which country this property is in. So country equals models.char field. Set the max length to 255. And copy this. I want the country code, so sort of, for example, NO for Norway or US for United States, so it's a little bit more universal. This can just be max length 10, so it doesn't take up too much space. I want to have a category field, so let's copy this one. Category, this is just a very simple string field. I want to have a favorited here, but we can come back to that one and instead use the image equals models.image field. I think this can upload to uploads / properties. This is also required because I want all of them to have a image. Landlord, this can also be created, but landlord or host is very easy to understand what to do. So models.foreign key, then we point up to the user here, user, and then I want to set something called related name equals properties, so it's easy to get all of the properties belonging to one specific landlord. On delete models.cascade. So if we delete the user, we also delete all of the user's properties. And I want to know when this was created. So created at equals models.date time field auto now add equals true. So this is just handled automatically by Django. So save this. Then we can update the database. So stop this one. Find the make migrations. And migrate. Hopefully this is working. There were no output, but yes. Let's see if I take away this. Just up. No migration to apply. Your models have changes that are not reflected in migration, so it won't be applied. Run make migrations. Okay, so it was not applied. But why are they not executed? Okay, so let's open up this entry point again. Maybe I just need to add them here. Python manage.py make migrations, and then afterwards we run that. If I now run this one, will it go into there? Yes, now it migrates and creates new tables, and it looks okay. Great. So then I don't have to rebuild as long as I have it here in the entry point. That's good to know. Okay, so now we should have the table, the database table for the property. So, in order to get this and show it in the front end, we need something called a serializer. And the serializer comes from the Django REST framework, and it takes data from here and convert it into JSON format. So let me open up here again, and inside this property I create a new file called serializers.py. You can call this whatever you want, but this makes sense and it's easy to understand what it actually does. So from the REST framework we import a function called serializers. Serializers. And then I want to import the property model we just created. So from .models import property. And then we can create the property list serializer. So class property. Properties we can have is plurally list serializer. Serializer.model serializer, because we want to base the serializer on a specific model. To do that we just specify a meta class here, say model equals property. So now the serializer know that this property, this model is this one, and then we just need to tell which fields we want to get there. And I want the ID field, I want the title field, I want the price per night, and I want the image URL. So then you may be asking where this come from. We only have a field called image. So I want to create a function called image URL. And that function should look something like this. Def image URL pass itself. And then we can say return f and then ticks, because we want to have a formatted string here. And say settings.website URL. This will then point to the variable we created here previously. This one. So we get this odd address automatically. So settings.website URL. Go after this curly brace. Create one more, self.image.url. So now we just point up to this field and we get the URL from that field. Save. And that's the serializer for the list of items or properties. As you can see here, we get the image. Sorry, I need to go to our project, which is there. The image, the title, the price per night. So the ID is what we use to go into that one. So now we know how to convert the data into JSON format, but we still need to create one more file here called api.py. So we need to use the serializer to actually make this URL available from the front end. So we can begin by importing a few things from Django.http import JSON response. And we need to import a few things from Django REST framework. So from REST framework dot decorators import API view. We need to import the authentication classes decorator and the permission classes. And that's it there. We can then import the model and the serializer we just created. So from .models import property from serializers. .serializers import properties list serializer. And then we can set up the view. So then we're going to begin by using this decorator here to tell Django that we are going to create an API view, API_view. And the only request method we want to use or allow here is get. So if you try to post to this view, you will just get an automatic warning. And in settings.py, we set that you should by default be registered and authenticated. But you can visit the website as a guest, and then we need to tell this specific view that you don't have to be authenticated. So let's just pass in an empty list there, and the same with the permissions classes. You don't need any permissions to view this page. Now we can say def permission. Then we create a view by saying def properties underscore list, pass in the request parameter just as a typical Django view. And then here we can say properties equals property.objects.all. So then we use this model to get all of the properties from the database. And then we use the serializer equals properties list serializers, pass in the properties we got from the database here, and say many equals true, because this is a list of properties and not just one object. Now we can say return JSON response and create a dictionary here, data serializer.data. So then we pass everything in to there, and then this view should be able to be used. And then we need to do one more thing, and that is to create a URLs file, urls.py, because I want to keep things as clean as possible. And you do that by having a separate urls.py file for each of the apps you're going to access from the front end. So from Django.urls import path, and from .import API. So we just import the whole API file. And we can set up the URL patterns list. And when the path is empty, like that, then we want to use api.properties list, name API properties list. We don't actually need this name, but I like to name them anyways. So the last thing we need to do then for the backend is to go into the main urls.py as you have here. Remove this ugly big comment. And at the end here we can say path like that. And when the path is api/properties / then we want to use include property.urls. So I get a warning here. we can import this together with path from Django.urls. So when the address is matches this one, it will go into this URL and find out that, okay, there was nothing more on the URL, so the URL is sort of this one, and then it matches this empty one, and we use this view. So let's try to see this in the browser, localhost 8000/API/properties/. Then I get the empty list because we don't have any data in the database. So we need to create a super user so that we can access the admin interface and add a demo property for testing. So stop this one and let's try to run create super user. That did not work. Can I access the shell? No. Django docker create super user. How do I access this one? Okay, so you see here I need to specify the correct container ID. So let's try this docker exec. Okay, is that maybe the problem that it's not supposed to be docker compose? No such container web. Okay, that's great. Remove web from there, find the docker desktop containers, and the name is actually backend web 1. Let's see if that works. No. Oh, no. Docker exec space, and then the name which was backend web 1, backend web 1, and then Python manage by create super user. So it is not running, then run it. Starting, so now it is running. Let's try one more time. Create super user. Why does not anything work for me? Let's try this whole here. Docker exec -it. Please work. Okay, nice. So then I'm in the shell, but I want to use the create super user command instead. Now this is working. So the command is docker exec it backend web 1. Backend 1 is the one I have there, backend _web _1. And then I need to specify email stein@codewithstein.com. My name Stein, my password. Created successfully, and this should now be running. So let's try to go to localhost to admin, log in with the user I just created. Nice. Okay, so we can't find the properties here, so I just need to add these. So if I go here, find property admin.py, and then say from.models import property admin.site.register property, and save. So if I refresh now, it should appear here. Great. Let's try to create one. First property, the description, just some random bullshit. Price per night, $100, 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, 4 guests, Norway, country code NO, category, example beach house. Not sure what this will be, but it can be like that for now. Stein is the landlord, and then I need an image. Project, Django BNB, demo images, beach 1, save. So that looks like it was working. Then I have the media folder, uploads, properties, beach 1 is there. Nice. So the image uploader and similar is working. Great. So if I then go back here, go to this one, API properties, then I actually have one in the data now, with the ID, the title, the price per night, and the image URL. So then if I look at the task list here, set this to done, this can be set to done, and then I want to make it possible to get the properties in the front end and list them. So instead of hard coding these here, I want to actually show the ones that we have in the database. So let me close everything here now and go to the front end to work again. Nice. Okay, so let me just go to the project there. And then if I open up Visual Studio Code, I can find the front end code for this. So I should have the property list. This is sort of where I want to get the data, and then we present it in here. So let's begin by getting data from the back end. So here we need to call or convert this to be a client component. So use client because I want this to happen on the client side. And then we need to import a few things from React. Import use effect and use state, because we need to know when this component is loaded, and we need to store data in the state so we can show it on the page from React like that. Then in here I can say use effect, create an arrow function, and just pass in an empty array there like that. So in this use effect here, I want to call a function called getProperties. So getProperties, because this cannot be asynchronous, but a function can be. So now we can create this asynchronous function by saying const getProperties equals async and create an arrow function like that. Then in here we need to load data from the backend. So the URL is const URL equals http://localhost 8000/API/properties. So later in this tutorial, I do not want to have this hard coded here and similar. We're going to load it and a few other things. But right now it can just be like this. And then I think I can just say await fetch URL method is get. I think this is correct. And when this is done, we can go down here and say .then response arrow function response.json. So we just return this and go to the next step, which is JSON, create a new arrow function, console.log JSON. So now we can see what we get from the server. And if there are an error, we can just say .catch error, pass it into arrow function, console.log error, so we can show it in the console what's wrong. Like that. So let me save, go here. Doesn't seem to have crashed at least. Okay, so there are something wrong with the course headers, of course. I don't think here is anything more info. No. Okay, so let's open up settings.py and then course allow all or origins equals true. Maybe that's the thing I need to set. Nope. Well, actually, this is what we can use for development. Yes, good. But I still get an empty response. But why do I do that? I can't see any list of errors right now. So there, refresh. So it's going to /API/properties, and now, okay, now it is working perfect. So you can see here, I get the data and then I have one property there. So let's go back here again, and then we need to set up a state for having all of the properties. So const create a list properties set properties. This can just use state and default be a list like that. I think that TypeScript is going to give me an error now, but let's see. Set properties JSON.data, because we want this array and not JSON itself. Save. Okay, so there are no errors still. And then down here I want to loop through the properties that we have here and implement one of these. So to do that, use this and say properties.map, create a variable property and the arrow function, and then we say return, because we want to return the data to create here, and pass in one of these, and we can remove these two. So if there are any data now, we know that it's the one that comes from the backend. Yes. And each child in the list should have a unique key. We can fix that by saying key equals property.id. So this property is this variable, and now I get a variable because now it's an error because ID does not exist on type never. And that's because we haven't specified what sort of type this data here is. So that will be the next step, to go up here to the property list top here. Now we can say export type property type. So equals. And here we want to expect ID, and the ID should be a string. And then we can change this use state here to actually use this property type. So use state, and then we put it in like this with the what is this called? Arrow bracket, I think. And then like that. And we need to specify that this is a list. Like that. So those type of brackets, list bracket in there, and then the brackets in there again. So then you can see that the warning here is gone now, because now TypeScript knows that we expect to have an ID in this one. So when I refresh now, this is actually loaded from the server. So now we can pass in a property object into this one by saying property equals property. And then I get a new warning from TypeScript because it doesn't expect to get a property there. So that should be inside here now. So at the top here we can say import property type from the other. So we just import the type we have here. And then we also want to specify which properties to put in here. So interface, so this is not a type but an interface, property props, not equals but curly brace, and here we expect to get property value, property, and this is a property type like that. And then we need to tell this component to actually use this list here. So we convert this to be a react.functional component and pass in the property props. And then we are soon ready. Inside here we create two curly braces and say that we are expecting a property. So if I now save and go back to this one, the error is gone because now we have this. This isn't property, so you don't have to specify it up here. But instead of hard coding the name, we can say property.title. Now I get the warning because you can see it's actually working, but this is sort of a warning from TypeScript because we don't have a title up here. So we can say title string, save, and then this warning is gone and this is working. Nice. So now we can show the price per night, property.price per night. Then we add that as well to this one, integer. No, just normal integer or a number. Number is correct, yes. Error is gone. Then we get the correct value from the database, and then it's just the image. And to show the image, we say remove the hard-coded here as a property.image URL. Then I get a new warning. This is actually just a string as well, so we can just say string like this. And then I get a new warning because localhost is not configured in the Next config, because we actually need to tell Next which backends or addresses we can load data from. So we need to open up next.config.mjs. So in here, in the Next config, we pass in a property called images, create a new dictionary, remote patterns, create a list, and then an object in there, protocol, HTTP, and the host name that we want to use is localhost. The port we want to allow is 8000. Remember, this is to the Docker. And the path name can be /*, so it's sort of a universal URL. So if I save now, go back and refresh, then hopefully it's loading, but the beach is not showing there. Okay, so there is something wrong with the URL there. This should be correct, so I think I can just close it. Let me see if the image exists. I think I need to configure a thing on Django. HTTP 8000 /media /uploads /properties /beach. This give me 404 error. Yes, that's correct. So if I open up urls.py in the main project, then I just need to specify here that I'm going to use this. So from django.conf import settings. So what we are actually doing now is to use the development server to host images. This is not something we need to do later in the project when we are going to deploy this. And we need to import one more thing from django.conf.urls.static import static. And then at the end here we said plus static, so we use a function, pass in settings.media URL, set the document root to be settings.media root, and save. So if I refresh here now, I should hopefully see the image. Nope. There it is. Perfect. And so if I then go here again, not there, but to the Django project and refresh, now this image is actually loading from Docker. Great. I can try to add one more property just for testing. Just add some random information. Try to use a different image, cabin, same landlord, and save. And if I now go and refresh, I actually have two here. Perfect. So now we can actually load data from the backend and show it in the front end. The code that we used in here is not the best one, so I'm going to restructure this soon and set up a service file and similar. So I can actually set this as a new to do here, create API service file, and use it in the properties list. But I can add this to done. And that was it for this time. If you have any questions about today's code, feel free to leave a comment below and I'll answer as soon as I can. See you in the next video.